Good evening, Bill. And with us tonight, our special guest is Shaun Jackson, who's a farm manager up in the Lakeland Downs area for Daintree Fresh. Good evening, Shaun.
Good evening.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight, mate. And sorry for, I'm sure you've been out there tending to the farm duties, and it's been a very arduous day. So we really appreciate the time for you to take your time out of your evening to have a chat with us and just discuss all things Queensland, or North Queensland, I should say. So thank you for that.
Sounds good. I'm pleased to be a North Queenslander when it's like this.
Oh, well, that's excellent. Well, Shaun, why don't you tell us about yourself? I've never had the great fortune to be able to visit Lakeland or the Lakeland Downs area, or anywhere up near that region. I guess semi-past Cooktown. I've been to Cooktown myself, but I haven't had the great fortune of being there. And I've heard nothing but great things about how it's a beautiful and untapped sort of area, and has much potential in the agricultural sense of things for North Queensland. Do you want to tell us about yourself and just the general area of Lakeland for a little bit?
Yeah, it's a very special area. I've travelled the world. I started a seed company called South Pacific Seeds along with 10 others, and travelled the world looking for genetics for the seed business for nearly 30 years, and saw many production areas all over the world and all over Australia. And I was involved in programming varieties to make them work and finding time slots for them that would be appropriate. And when seedless melons came into Australia, we were looking for climates that would make seedless melons work and be a viable proposition, because they're a very tricky crop to grow. In looking at all the climate data and information, I came up with Lakeland as one of the best possible areas to grow. It's got the warmest winter. It's elevated. It doesn't rain during the growing season. You haven't got a threat of frosts, and you haven't got a threat of cyclones during the growing time. It's got beautiful soil, and it's got some really pristine water, and it's also got, we're in the trade winds, so we get these lovely winds most days in summer and winter, and they keep it a little bit cool, and they keep the dew off the crop, which is another help. So really, in my looking around, I looked for another company and said they were interested in growing watermelons, and I said this is the best place in Australia to do it. For one reason or another, they didn't end up buying this property, and I decided to buy it with a couple of good friends of mine who helped me with the investment. We've gone ahead and done 3,000 to 4,000 tonne of watermelon a year, and in this whole process through my seed life, I've been working on and breeding this pumpkin for nearly 11 years to introduce it into the Australian marketplace.
And has it a name?
That's a fan. Yeah.
Sorry,
Shaun, does your variety of watermelon have a name, or your pumpkin? Sorry.
Well, we're actually growing. We're growing several things on the farm. It's sort of a pretty interesting farm, and me being slightly sciencey means that I'm using it as a bit of a trial ground, although it has to be a commercial enterprise. So we're doing really high quality watermelons. We're doing beautiful eating passion fruit. We've got papaya that we're just having a look at, and we're also growing leptospermum trees for honey. But the main project I was involved in was developing orange glow pumpkin, which again I was involved in establishing Kent on the market, broccolini and seedless. So I went through the process of introducing things that the market wasn't used to. And when I got involved with Kent, the things I saw about it were that its colour was okay, but not great. It was wet when it was cooked, and it had a green skin, and it was too big. So I looked around the world for various varieties to incorporate, and I started to do crosses with many different things. And genetics, or working with genetics, is sort of, it's a little bit like gambling, Sometimes you can put a lot of coins in and get nothing, and sometimes you can put one coin in and get something. And after quite a few years of crosses, we made a large number of crosses and sowed them out, and there was probably close to 20,000 plants in a field. And out of those 20,000 plants, one plant became obvious that what we were looking for, and that was a variegated plant with yellow stems and an orange stem, and the fruit had absolutely no green on it, and what's called a precocious gene, or a yellow stem attached to it, not a green stem. and that meant that we wouldn't get greening in the fruit, and so we don't get greening in the skin. Then that allows us to use the pumpkin for processing without peeling it, and that's a major thing in pumpkins. Has been one of the real big issues, is having to peel pumpkins before processing them is a very expensive job, and you lose a lot of volume. So I included this as part of fresh market, but also part of the process deal.
So, do you know what? It's fantastic when you listen to people that are really in the mindset of and understanding their product, whether they be a mechanic, whether they be an engineer, but when they could talk about either the product that they're selling or the services that they're selling, like yourself just then, about the genetic composition and the makeup, and how you even went to the extent to find the Goldilocks region in which you could adequately have the right environment to be able to sufficiently produce this in large quantities. I bow down to it, mate, because it's great to hear that entrepreneurship and ingenuity in the agricultural sector of North Queensland has spurred you on to be able to take an area like Lakelands that has the potential, and you identified it, to turn it into what is now obviously a fantastic supplier of fresh produce to the whole of central North Queensland and the rest of Australia for that matter. Bill, did you want to ask Shaun something? I've cut you off once or twice. I'm sorry.
No, I was just thinking pumpkins is sort of a bit of a tale in our household in regards to someone likes the old standard old Jarrahdale pumpkin, which I can't abide by, because I think it's a real hard thing to peel, and it seems to still be hard after you give it a good bake in the baking dish, and other people prefer things like the Kent or Jap, that sort of basically after it goes through the baking dish and you eat it, you can just about strain it through your teeth. So there's a major difference in texture in that for one pumpkin lover to the other. That's all. I think it's quite amazing. There's something as basic as the pumpkin.
And I think that's no doubt thanks to people like Shaun, Bill. I think that's no doubt thanks to people like Shaun, who have that genetic composition and labour of love that makes it such a palatable sort of product when it would have not have necessarily been so a little while ago. And I had the thought actually as well, Shaun, as when you mentioned that you were one of the first people to bring broccolini to the market in Australia, I was thinking kids everywhere just went, "That was you?"
That's right. And one thing I can tell you, when we first brought broccolini into the market, everybody told us it looked like rubbish broccoli. It was too loose and it wasn't any good and it wasn't this and it wasn't that. And we did what I'm doing with the pumpkin. We took it to the restaurants, and the restaurants put it in and cooked it up, and it came up with this beautiful tender flavour, and did the garlic steams and all the rest. And the next thing is people are asking at the shops, and the shops put it in, and now there's virtually more broccolini sold than broccoli. So these things don't start easily, and people are used to eating what they're used to eating, right? And the upside of this, of course, is that under the current circumstance where people are a bit pressed on finance at home these days, a pumpkin is incredible value. And I just made one tonight where I cut a couple of pieces of pumpkin, put them in the oven, roasted them up, put them in the Vitamizer with a bit of coconut oil and some fennel seed, munched them up and made a puree. And I cooked some salmon and put it on top of the pumpkin puree, and I tell you, it is absolutely delicious.
I've already had dinner, but I'm hungry again, so thank you for that. But listen, Shaun, I was curious because you mentioned once you identified with all your research and understanding of what you needed for the watermelon, when you'd first understood that you needed the right environment to plant them, you knew that it was going to penetrate into the market. What year was that when you first decided to make that leap with your close friends and investors to purchase and start start taming the land in the Lakeland Downs area?
We've been 5 years on producing watermelons on the farm. We bought it November 6 years ago, and of course the place is full of rocks. But again, we've got rich red deep soil and great water, and warm but not hot climate most of the time, and it's really hard to beat. I mean, we stuck some vegetables in for a home garden for our workers because we get We've got accommodation on the farm, and we do our own veggies because we're a bit far from shops. And I often say to people, you put things in the ground. If you stand in the ground, you grow. We had zucchinis in 20 days. We've had hot chilies in 50 days. We've had, watermelon we can get in 60 days when we first plant them, up to 75 days in the winter. And, the things just love that far north Queensland climate.
Is it?
Well, it sounds like you said, yeah. Sorry, Bill, go.
You're just mentioning sort of rocky ground and that. Is that why sort of vine type crops are more preferred to utilise in that area? Because I know with vine crops you really only got sort of one point in the ground, and the vine just runs across the ground and grows more and more fruit. And so it's not a matter of trying to plant in between the rocks type of thing, like when you're doing a crop of a wheat crop or something like that. Is that why? Is that one of the things that sort of pushed you into the vine growing sort of area in Lakelands?
Oh, look, it's a help. It's a help, but in my understanding of the marketplace, the real reason was that I knew that it was the best winter production area for cucurbits in Australia, and if that's the case, then the prices fluctuate because of supply. But if you grow in the right area at the right time, and you grow the right varieties, and you know what you're doing, over a period of a few years, you should average to be able to actually make money out of farming. And that's no simple task, I can tell you, with the pressures from various people and the costs of farming and the increased costs as they go. So the real reason for cucurbits is because that is exactly the right place to do it. And when you get the cold winters, or you get rain on the coast, or you get cool nights in inland Northern Territory, then our price kicks and we can make some money and carry ourselves through to the next year. But the rocks you have to get the rocks out of the ground where you're growing and try not to get them out in between where you're growing. But the damn things grow up out of the ground. You go and clean the rocks out. And because we get a very long dry season, then a big wet season, and the expansion and contraction of the soil means the damn rocks keep coming up. So you get them out and you go through, and there's some more that have come up from down the depths again. So it's sort of an ongoing job.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Yes. I want to find a market for rocks, then I'd be really quite well off. Well, mining is one of the biggest industries of Central and North Queensland. True.
So if it's the right sort of rocks, mate, you're in the clear. You're all right. Yeah. But listen, look. Given the lifespan that even the 5 years that you yourself and the business has been up there in the Lakelands down area, you mentioned yourself about the significantly wet seasons that we have, and as well as what can be a significant lack of water for the 6 to 8 months of the year as well. But I understand that they've always had the ambition to, as so many areas of Central and North Queensland have, to build a dam to really try and expand the agricultural area of Lakeland Downs. And do you know much about what they planned there? I think it was on was it the Palmer that they were contemplating building a dam up there?
Yeah, no, that's moving forward. The Palmer, we believe it's moving forward, and I think there's a whole lot of talk. There's a lot of interesting things going on in agriculture in the far north, and I'm right on the verge of some really interesting potential business for export to Japan. And I don't want to talk a whole lot about it, but if I can secure
That's fair enough.
If I can at this point in time, if I can secure this export to Japan, I've got 1,000 acres, 300 of which I farm. Well, I'd need 3,000 acres to produce it. So I really think there's some interesting opportunities coming up because we do have the right climate, and I think we'll be able to expand that area. And thankfully, the government's talking about putting in this Palmer River Dam because, really the Lakeland area is full of the most beautiful soil. And the limiting factor for us is water. And the current...
well, that's perfect that you... sorry, finish it.
All right. Actually, it's interesting you asked that question because I was in an argument with the water resources for the Queensland government, and I had some battles with them, and we ran out of water 2 years ago and cost us a lot of money in not finishing our season because our bores went dry. And we've had 2 good wet seasons since. But I wanted to put a dam in to cover us just a 100 meg dam down the back of the farm to catch the overland flow off our farm when it rains. And we're not allowed to build a dam on our own farm to catch the rainwater on our own farm, according to the Queensland government.
I guess,
Well,
and this is the perfect ability to be able to mention about even in the 5-year tenure. I mean, you've mentioned about how Queensland agriculture is experiencing a very, very strange times, because it's not just agriculture; it's the fisheries, and we've had previous guests that were head of associations down in the Mackay area, and look. It's getting to the point where farmers are at the stage they can't build dams on their own property like yourself. It's at the stage where even like when I think it was the start of last year, there was X amount of millions of dollars up for an investment into airports to actively increase the ability to export produce to overseas areas. And there was an area like Cairns, gateway to one of the biggest agricultural areas in Australia, to the whole of the Tableland area, to the Lakeland down area, and everywhere up and down to the up to the Cape, and we had to split it with, I think, Toowoomba. So, what are your thoughts on the fact that you are dealing with government bodies that are predominantly conservative in nature when it comes to the environment, especially when it's coming out of the bureaucracy in the southeast corner? I mean, you've obviously had hardships dealing with Queensland Water. Is it one of many experiences that you've had dealing with people from the Queensland government?
Look, I'm incredibly frustrated by it. We dig holes in the ground and send irreplaceable minerals overseas at current world prices, when we all know that in another 20, 30 years they're going to be 50 times more expensive, and we'll probably be buying them back. And in the middle of doing all that, we have a most amazing opportunity to dedicate ourselves to horticultural production. We've got most of Asia wanting clean, green, good food. We can do it. The capital to do it is not so easy to come by, but the problem in doing it is that, like a week ago, we had people turning up to our farm directed by bureaucrats coming in at $2,500 cost to go through fresh care, to do a whole lot of checks and graces, because one farmer made one mistake and poisoned some people, and so all of a sudden there's a bunch of bureaucrats who every year wake up and scratch their butts and decide they're going to write another program for fresh care, and we have to learn their new program and pay $2,500 to put it in place just to grow crops. Before I pay excess transport costs down to Brisbane to be able to export it. I mean, if they had the sense to see the employment opportunity that far North Queensland has in producing now for Asia, particularly with China having being less trusted, should I say, in the food marketplace, there's a golden opportunity to make repeatable, sustainable production systems that could leave Australia, employ people and make stuff happen that we could do year after year at changing values. We just need this government to come and help us, to get out of our back pocket, to leave us alone to get on with it, and to help us apply the infrastructure to make that happen. And the sky's the limit. The opportunity is abounding.
Yes, and it's just another $2,500 overhead that you and every other farmer in North Queensland, Central Queensland has to manage. And I'm sure, given another 12 months, given another 18 months, there'll be another $2,000 thing that you guys have to take up on as an overhead. Well, and it's absurd when you say the potential is there. Yes.
Well, and the other cause, it's not actually simply the overhead. The other part of the overhead is that then I've had someone who's full-time employed. Yeah, and people who are full-time employed when they could be doing smart things about selling and marketing our business, but they're full-time employed abiding by the government's rules, most of which we would do regardless, because we want to be safe and we want to look after our workers and we want clean food, and the marketplace would sort it out if we messed it up. We don't need some bureaucrat to tell us what they think's right.
Well, especially because the market is ultimately you trying to produce the best product that you can to make it more saleable, to make it more profitable, to make it more desirable is what you're trying to achieve, not necessarily the government being involved in that process, isn't it?
That's right, common sense. I mean, common sense applies. Exactly. The only thing about common sense is it's not common. It's certainly not common in government. But common sense applies to making things work well, because the marketplace sorts us out, right?
Well, exactly, and you're not there to make the worst pumpkins and the worst passion fruit and the worst papaya that's possible, and just try and sell it for the cheapest amount you can. You're there to make the best product, the most desirable product, and ultimately experience the economic benefit from having that. And look, it seems to me that even as the years goes on, as the months go on, even talking, like I said, from people involved in the other primary producing industries like fishing, it's as if there's a vendetta and they're out to get some industries for no particular reason, especially when it comes to fresh seafood, especially when it comes to great produce like yourself. That's export quality, especially, like you said, to places like Japan. And Japan they're not an easy customer, I imagine. They really do, as far as I understand, only want the best. I've been there myself 3 times, and they don't mess around when it comes to produce.
There's nothing wrong with a particular customer. What's wrong is a government that doesn't understand what that customer wants, telling you to do things that don't work for that customer. That's the difficult part.
Well, exactly, yes. Well,
so the Japanese make
mentioned about that. Oh, sorry, continue.
So the Japanese make a great challenge, because if you dot the I's and cross the T's and work towards what they want, and then you make it into their business and you abide by it, then from that point on, you're safe as houses. You're going to run a good, solid business, employ a lot of people, and have a healthy, long-term relationship. And that's worth dotting the I's and crossing the T's with. Whereas when you deal with the bureaucrats here, all you do is wait for the next change and have to pay for
it. and fingers crossed that all goes through, and you have the ability to get that extra 3,000. I think you said it was 3,000 hectares up and running, so you can hopefully make that relationship, as you say. Did you have something to say? Sorry, Bob?
I was just thinking in regards to the government sort of oversight of producers and things. It's so they don't trust any producer or any person on the land or anyone on the sea, that they're looking after the best interests of the land and the environment, which has always been a bit of a fallacy, because all right, you can go back, hundreds of years or even 50 years ago when we were sort of just searching our way around of what was the best methods, especially in a harsh country like Australia. But now I think everyone realises that the growers in that, they want their land there year after year after year for generations to continue producing. And they're not going to endanger that by doing or bringing in practices that harm the environment and harm their land. So it's quite ridiculous that the government has this approach all the time, that you've got to be overseen to the nth degree and abide by all their guidelines, rather than them just understanding your operations and procedures and accepting that they're in the best interest of the land that you farm.
Well, I suppose, the problem is, of course, is that if they relied on us and our common sense, then we wouldn't employ a myriad of bureaucrats to be able to then employ a sub-myriad of bureaucrats to tick off whether they're right or wrong, and have another 20,000 public servants employed, so that the employment history in the state looks good. I suppose it would be just a terrible waste to have us do it autonomously, wouldn't it?
Well, and all employed in the Brisbane centre as well. So another $20,000 employees on X amount a year, all contributing to the economy of Southeast Queensland to manage people managing their own land in a place like the Lakeland.
Exactly.
And fly up once a year and fly up twice a year, just to be able to implement what they believe is now new procedure. It's an absurd system. But look, I want to touch on as well as what your thoughts were at the end of last year, because I had it in my head, because I remember reading the article and being a bit upset about it, because like I mentioned, there was a particular grant that was made available for export opportunities from the Queensland government, and it was up in the air who was going to get it. And for a while there, it was going to be Cairns, and I remember our Minister for Cairns, Michael Healy, promising the world and saying, how good is the Cairns airport going to be with this X amount of $1 million grant? I'm just skimming over it. I can't see the actual amount that it was worth. And having the ability for Queensland agricultural export to the whole of Southeast Asia, it's going to be amazing. And then only weeks later, it was determined that it would go half to Toowoomba and half to Cairns. Now, were you up to date with what was happening with that grant, and were you excited about the prospects, especially because you understood the potential for yourself and your company there at Daintree Fresh to be able to export and utilise that grant and the upgraded facilities at the Cairns Airport?
Yeah, look, it's really hard to know how to get into those things and where to start, and I think part of the key situation we're in is those of us who are trying to succeed are working so hard and working such long hours. It's really difficult to dig into the way these bureaucrats set these things up and how they write them up and what they do. Just like this water resources guy says to me, well, we've done a 50 page document. And that should explain everything. And, you know, I'm farming daylight till dark and I'm doing a range of other things. I don't have time to look at their 50 page documents. But what I do know is that they were talking about, back on the other subject, they were talking about water trading. And I knew there was water trading. So do you know what their answer to me about how to sort my water problem out with the dam? If I was prepared.
Oh, please tell us.
If I was prepared, which I'll tell you, I went through the hoops, I tried. If I was prepared to go and buy water off the Aboriginals on Cape York, where the water falls on plants and into the ground and they don't touch it, they don't farm it, they don't use it. But if I was to trade with them, I could then put a dam on my property and pay the Aboriginals on Cape York for the water that fell from the sky on my property. That was their answer.
Okay.
So,
right.
so along with, I actually got him to repeat that answer because I couldn't believe it. But when he repeated that answer to me,
I bet you were flabbergasted.
That's one way to put it. But I was a little surprised. So what I made two suggestions. So what I did is I then went to some effort to contact Aboriginals to see if I could make this happen. And during that process, do you know that I would have to fly 15 elders down from the Northern Territory and from the Cape. I would have to put them up under accommodation for a couple of days. I'd have to go through their lawyers. I'd have to do X, Y, and Z. And do you know what that turned out to be costing? Towards
significantly more than getting the water off the main.
Exactly, $200,000 a dam was going to be $150. Getting to the table to get the application was going to be $200.
And there was no guarantee you were going to get the permission anyway.
Before I paid for the water.
Wow.
So figure that one out.
Transfer of wealth.
Well,
wow.
Well, my answer to him, I had two answers. Firstly, I said, I don't need to pay your blood money. And second answer is, when your grandkids get hungry, you'll know you people went too far.
You know what? There's so many stories I have rolling around in my head right now of early communist Russia and the agricultural Baltic area in the early stages of the communist Russia, and then how they had the hugest famine. Only a couple decades afterwards.
Exactly.
Or a decade afterwards.
Exactly. We're looking down that throat. These people have no idea. No idea how hard they've squeezed my industry, the production industry. They've got no idea how far they've squeezed it and how few second generation, third generation people are interested in going farming because it's just too hard. It's too big a gamble, too much money involved, and it's too hard to get it back.
Yeah, the kulaks. Thank you to Matthew, one of our listeners, who knew what I was talking about. I couldn't quite put my name on it. It's a very sad. And you know what? It's funny that you made the comment about how you are both a businessman and an avid worker on your own land, but you don't have the time to read these long-bodied and long-winded documents that come out that are 50 pages or more, especially if there's one every week waiting on your desk every Thursday evening for you to enjoy with your salmon. You know, it's absurd that they expect everybody in the modern age we live in, no matter what industry, that you're going to have the time like they do. Necessarily the bureaucrats, to read every single document that comes by that will affect their industry. And no wonder there's as we move on there's more governing industry bodies like the cane growers and like I'm sure you're a member of many industries. But it's something that Bill and I were talking about before, while you were finishing dinner, because I mentioned about how farmers are just like everybody now. They're strapped for time. If you're dealing with the newest breakdown or some sort of problem that's on the far end of a paddock, you're not going to be able to have the avid time to deal with these problems. And it seems like you basically mimicked that sort of conversation we were having. Are these examples only one or two that you can actually tell us? There's significantly more. Would that be correct?
Yeah,
these aren't just isolated instances.
I hate to think where they stop and start, and I don't know that either one of the governments is the answer. I think the problem is that I call it a sheltered workshop. I think these people, in most cases, have been buried in a sheltered workshop of the city and the parliament and the law degrees and coming from good families. And I can bet that I'll use her as an example, but I can bet that Anastasia Palaszczuk has never woken up in the morning with her guts grinding after working 30 years to make a successful business, wondering where the next dollar is going to come from. She's never felt that. And having never felt that, she can't relate to how those people in this country and this state are dealing with what's going on around them right now. And the issue is these people...
That's very well said.
These people have no understanding of how that feels, so that they can't get in your shoes, so they don't do the right job for you. That's the basic problem.
Very well said, mate. I totally and utterly agree. I think one of the biggest components as well is because of these people of, especially when it comes to the bureaucracy that's currently existing in Queensland, is these high-level decision makers are all in southeast Queensland, and to adequately benefit the whole of Queensland, both central, north, as well as southeast and southwest, I don't think that they're in tune with the rest of the state, and consequently, that's why a lot of people, whether they're avid supporters of the Brisbane campaign or Yes to a North Queensland state, whatever, they all feel the injustice, whether it's a farmer dealing with Water Queensland, whether it's the primary producers in central Queensland dealing with regulations to reef runoff. Everyone knows something amiss. And you know what? The psychological component to exactly what you just said, the sheltered workshop, is one of the key components as to why we know things are wrong, and it's why, as Central and North Queensland, we should unite and create a new state. Do you have thoughts on the matter whatsoever, and could you see the benefits to an industry like the agricultural industry, like the marine industry, like the fishing industry, of completely removing all of that red tape out of the southeast Queensland sort of governance?
I mean, you've got the battle on your hands is that the media are heavily controlled, and the media are going to pull the strings of the people that they currently pull the strings for. So, I mean, most changes are pretty difficult in this country because, unfortunately, a large percentage of the public are down to thinking what they hear over the 4 television stations is real. So that's the hard part.
Well, it's true, and as time goes on, it's only more evident that entities like News Corp, who are shutting down their more regionalised papers, like the local paper in Mackay and other sort of central and North Queensland smaller papers, it only tells you where they are placed in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the sort of news that they want to distribute. So I totally agree with you there also.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, the answer is get some good people with common sense involved in it, and the system sets it up for the two parties, and I don't know them well. I'm sort of lost interest in it, to be honest. To some extent, you get to a point where you just try and bury your head in a business and make it good enough and robust enough to go through even dealing with them.
Can I jump in there?
Well, go, Bill. Sorry. Yeah.
With Lakelands, obviously you're interested in getting that area really up and swinging sort of thing, and you've got other growers up there doing other things, but you also got competing interests down in the tablelands that want things like the Alinga Dam done as well, and then I think you've got interests over in the Gilbert River with irrigation and that. So, being a vast area of central North Queensland, there's a lot of competing interests for, I suppose, taxpayers' dollars or investment dollars of any kind.
Yeah.
One of the things that interests me in regards to, although it's great to get new crops in and new industries, what I'd like to see if they could actually drag greater populations in. Do you think there's a future in, like, if Lakeland gets fully running with adequate water and that, it can attract a permanent population, the sort of, and that's what we need. We need a growing population in central and north Queensland to keep in step with the rest of Australia. Do you think investments like yours and even the Linga Dam on the tablelands can actually create an environment and amenities where people would come and live, not just for your industry, but just to live there and create other support type industries?
Look, I think I'll give you one example. I'll give you one very simple example. This thing I'm doing now with this pumpkin, we make, we can produce it, and I'm figuring out how to do it relatively cheaply, and we're going to make pumpkin flour out of it. Now, the pumpkin flour is extremely high in beta carotene and extremely high in antioxidants, and currently 500,000 kids all over the world in the third world countries suffer from blindness from a lack of beta carotene because you don't get it in rice, and half of them die. If this government said, let's stop shipping money all over the world as aid, and let's actually set up a production system in Australia growing this pumpkin, making flour out of it, and then shipping that directly so they sprinkle it on top of their rice, then we'd have an efficient form of delivering real health to people who are suffering, instead of sending money to governments of which 10% lands on the ground. That industry alone would be more land than we've got in Lakeland. I can't tell you where that would stop us. The amount of we're just entering into this business with Japan about watermelons and honeydews and a few other things and pumpkins that they've opened up, and I think we're going to do our pumpkin there. And again, we don't have enough land. And if we were processing this thing and making flour up there, we could have a very big business making flour up there. They want, currently we're talking about 3 B doubles a week to ship melons up to Japan to satisfy 20% of their market for this current melon. And that's going to take all the land I've got. So we could, there's no end to what we could do in Australia in efficient horticultural production and processing to supply the world with food rather than dig holes in the ground and send minerals out. All we need to do is have people helping us and getting on board and seeing the big picture and working with us, and you could turn the places into cities without question.
Well, and the government that's willing to step aside and not hinder, and the biggest help that they can contribute is by not being involved in lots of different ways. And it seems like with the current way that the Queensland government is pursuing when it comes to the agricultural industry, they're only on a path to get more involved, which is even more of a reason why a parliament that would only consist of representatives from central and north Queensland would actively have significantly more farmers in every electorate, therefore would have the farmers' interest more in line. And every time we have these interviews and we speak to somebody in a respective industry like yourself, who's been very enlightening, and you've had a very fantastic view, even the one you just mentioned about how you could actively create a product that would help a foreign problem around the world, especially when it comes to malnutrition or a lack of certain antioxidants and vitamins. The mind boggles, and all the more reason why there's many of us, and the silent majority in my mind of central and north Queenslanders, because they know that something is wrong. We could do things our own way, and we could have people like yourself that could be left alone to only flourish in their respective industries, because we all know that we can't keep employing more people in southeast Queensland at the expense of central and north Queensland and expect things to be hunky-dory for everybody. And the untapped potential, no matter what it is in agriculture, and you're one isolated instance of such potential that could be there if only the support was there from the government to be able to initiate any sort of process for you to, even if it was a small grant to help you actually negotiate better with the companies overseas, negotiate better with the people in Japan, to help those things along the line. Instead, you get a $2,500 bill for somebody to come around and tell you can't have a dam on your land. You have a bureaucrat to tell you that you have to go and negotiate with people from Cape York to be able to even have permission to build the dam. It seems to be utter absurdity. And look, I give you full credit for even entertaining the idea, but it seemed like it was always going to be difficult.
Yeah, it is, and I agree. I think there's a chance that if we could have some self-determination, then we could probably drive this thing quite hard, and we could really be very successful for the country and for employment. I do have to say, in the middle of that, we've got QDAF who've been involved in doing a grant with us on waste food, and that looks really promising to pull the pumpkin apart. So, I mean, the Queensland government that they have got some projects which are really quite interesting that we're involved in, with some Export Council and some other things. They're just really hard to be involved with, because you've virtually got to have a full-time employment, or you've got to be involved with a very big accountancy firm to be able to go through the process to make it happen, which is a bit tricky from a medium and small business.
Well, I suppose, and no one generally wants to be involved in any form of thing where it's 2 steps forward or 1 step back, or even I can't help but think it might be more like 1 step forward, 2 steps back when it's dealing with the Queensland government. And it's been too many stories where the involvement of the Queensland government is more, especially when it comes to agriculture in central North Queensland, is more hindrance than it is help. And look, it's good to hear that there are generally some positive things that's come out of the Queensland government and other bodies which distribute grant money. But ultimately, do you see things getting more difficult? Just as I don't expect a perfect answer for that, but do you see things getting more difficult as time progresses, especially as we're entering into 4-year terms in Queensland politics? That is, of course, unless there's a hung parliament and a minor central North Queensland party decides to push the issue of a North Queensland state. But do you see, as time progresses, getting more difficult for the farmer?
No question. So far, it's absolutely no question. And I absolutely cannot understand them, because the real opportunity in this country is food. And to get behind food with sustainable, smart production systems, we can be the food bowl for Asia, for Southeast Asia. And we certainly have to apply ourselves to the wealthier part of Southeast Asia. But that's okay, because there's plenty of wealth there and they want good food. And we've got good food. We've got lots of country, lots of water. But we don't have the training for the people behind the scenes. There's nobody going through universities right now. And I can tell you, in my industry, there's a very thin line between those older farmers who are out there making food for Australia and the next generation coming, and it will come home to roost.
Well, and they're only shutting down the regional agricultural colleges, from what I understand. I think, Bill, can you remind us on what they've done just recently in the last 12 months even? I think, was it Rockhampton? There was an agricultural college that they shut down, and then they had plans for another one as well.
I think there was only two left in Queensland. One was in Longreach. I'm not sure where the other one's, but they're both closed since. So there is no
Longreach. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So there's no agricultural colleges left in Queensland. But I think one of the biggest problems with the government is they don't seem to understand the fact that the industries themselves are always trying to improve the lot for both, the grower and the land. My brother-in-law in Perth, he's involved in turf farming, and one of the big problems they have over there is they're sitting on top of the Perth Basin, which is a big artesian area, and where a good portion of Perth's water supply comes from. If you go basically all the northern suburbs get service from bore water, not the Mundaring or dam. So there's always been concern that because Perth's very sandy soil, the water leaches through fairly quickly. Places like Bullsbrook, where there's major turf farms, the watering and the fertiliser, the concerns were that the fertiliser will leach down into the artesian basin. So that the industry itself basically was quite aware of this, and I think you'll find that what they did is they went off to the United States and they started to get involved with nanotechnology, so that the delivery of fertilizer is so controlled and so minute that it sort of there's no sort of overuse anymore or anything like that. So the industries themselves are sort of self-regulating and always improving anyway. So some of the concerns that the government has is already being taken, being addressed by industry, and not just in Australia but across the world. And that nanotechnology and fertilizer and delivery of pesticide is going to be a major game changer in regards to things like runoff in the future. But that wasn't a government sort of initiative. That was an industry initiative.
No, of course they are. I mean, fertilizer costs money. You're not going to waste it. We on our farm we got red soil in it, and it's quite deep red soil, and we use trickle irrigation. And I put a very expensive system in where I can run it from my phone here in Brisbane when I'm not on the farm, and what we do is we pulse, so we actually irrigate. So what we do is we irrigate for 20 minutes, and then we move to another block for 20 minutes. We come back to the block for 20 minutes. So if you can picture the shape of an onion, when our first irrigation goes in a drip like an onion, and the second irrigation, due to surface tension, sits on top of that drip and goes wide, and it spreads out in the bed. And so we never water the fertilizer out of the root zone. We do that as a matter of course. We want to use less water. We want to use less fertilizer. We want to apply air to our plants. And what's the point of washing it down deep? I mean, it's common goddamn sense. We don't need these pricks to tell us what to do. If you're a farmer who does the wrong thing, it's going to cost you so much money, you're not going to be there in a few years anyway.
Well, exactly.
I think that's what my brother-in-law was sort of suggesting, in regards to all these things, that, out there's industries in all fields that are sort of being more innovative than these governments can ever think of, So, I mean, industries will take care of themselves if you're setting the right environment for them to operate and be productive. They're going to be the most productive they can, and also get the best out of their land for generations to come. So it seems to just be...
And prosper.
They just can't seem to get that mindset out of their head that, somehow, everything to do with the land is destroying it, So it's just a hard thing to deal with, I suppose.
I did a drone flyover over a block of land that we've been using for 5 years, and then we opened up some new country. We pulled some rocks out and stretched into some new country. And on the drone flyover, you can see that the country that we've been using, that we've applied zeolite and microbes to, and humic acid and all the other smart things that create organic carbon and create a life cycle within the soil. Over the 5 years, you could see these plants half as big, again, as the ones that were in the brand spanking new ground that we hadn't touched. Because we're improving our damn ground. Because we need to improve it, because it's what we've got to use. We don't need them to tell us that.
Well, yes, and obviously the longer you can get out of the least resources you can use, and the longer you can get out of a plant and out of the ground without having to replenish it in any way, like you said, use fertilizer, is not only an ecological benefit for both the soil, the environment, and it's less cost. It's an economic benefit as well. It's only smart on every single facet. And right. Look, it sounds like people like yourself who are entrepreneurial and trying to build these relationships overseas, trying to build secondary industries that come off the prospering agricultural industry in a place like Lakeland's. I can only imagine the township that would be required if if one of the biggest export hubs of North Queensland was Lakelands, and the fresh produce came down in truckloads to be able to go to places like Japan, I could only imagine the secondary onflow of effect. So, like you said, we could build cities out of nowhere. Not necessarily there'd probably ever be a city in a place like Lakelands. No offence, but it's a beautiful part of the world with a beautiful prospect, so much potential that needs to be tapped. And the whole of North Queensland is like that in all industries. But we only need the political will, and we only need the direction, and we only need the stepping back of these draconian sort of style of governance from the Brisbane area to allow people like yourself to just do what you do best. And look, as we come on to an hour, I just wanted to say it's been fantastic having you on, Shaun, and thank you for sharing all your experiences dealing with the Queensland government. Like you said, even some positive ones, but it's a worry, if anything, to the tune of like not being able to build a dam onto your own farm to help you make that step for productivity into the future. It's only a worry for myself, and I'm sure many people would be very worried about that sort of a scenario.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, again, just quickly in my travels, I've travelled to Chile, and I see a third world country that's taken the world by storm and exporting to Europe, and they're doing an amazing job because they're hungry and they're hard, and it's a so-called third world country. And here we are on Asia's doorstep as a first world country, and all we do is dig holes in the ground and ship shit to them that we can't replace. How good are we?
Well, exactly right. And you know what? If boatloads of coal can go over to Japan for their coal-fired power stations, why can't the beautiful fresh produce from a place like Lakelands go there as well?
Exactly.
And to be able to stipulate where one is okay and one is not, because the Queensland government only hinders your ability to do that, is only saddening, because one is definitely more as a long-term relationship builder. One is not necessarily better than the other. Both are mutually beneficial to both parties and should only be encouraged to prosper and happen, because that relationship, if strengthened, if the commitment is made and kept and everybody is happy, only leads to other relationships. And like you said, the Southeast Asia market is one of the largest in the whole world, if not the largest, especially when it comes to produce. And it's exciting times for yourself. I must say, I could sense the excitement in your voice, and I'm excited for you, mate, because I hope it all comes down and all the chips fall the way they should for that to come. It sounds like you're going to be a busy man, though, if it does, because of the maxed out capacity of the farm. But time will tell, hey?
Yes, time will tell. You got to be in it to win it, right?
Yeah. Well, as you do, mate, and like I said just before, and I don't mean to repeat myself, it's that entrepreneurial spirit, even in the agricultural sector, from people like yourself who have spent years and years from seed development, from genetics, to say, look, I have found this particular area in North Queensland, and it's the Goldilocks for so many of this variety of melons, for passion fruit, for endless potential of so many varieties of plant. We need to tap into this, and for the ability of that area to not only increase, but to benefit the local communities at hand, and even the greater area of the Cape York, is sad, considering that one of the biggest hurdles you're encountering are things like legislation out of the Queensland government. And look, as I said, I think as time goes on, I hope it doesn't get worse, but look, we need significant change, and hopefully this election, or come the next in 4 years, we can find a minor party that, if a hung parliament can occur, has the political courage and will to lead central and North Queensland hopefully into a better future where industries like yourself can do what you do best. And it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling, some of the stuff you've said tonight.
It's as it is, yeah. I can tell you. I'm as shocked as you are. I'm just...
Well, Bill, did you have any finishing thoughts as we wrap up tonight's episode?
Yes, I just want to repeat on the thing that I was talking about before in regards to how industry can be the leader if on all things in regards to their production and their development and their longevity, if the government sort of gives them the respect of their capability and their self-interest to make sure that they sustain their environment and get the most out of it. and just trust the people doing the job rather than sort of thinking that they have to keep bashing them into some sort of line based on some ideology coming out of the concrete jungles of Sydney, Canberra, Brisbane, and the rest of it, and sort of take some faith in the people who are actually on the land doing the job, that they know what they're doing and they will do the best for their environment and their families and their industries.
Yes, and obviously the whole of the greater community can benefit too, whether it's, like I said, on-flow effects of other industries required to maintain the agricultural industry, and the supply and demand then needed for that localised community. It's not just agriculture in itself, especially when it comes to the export capacity. It's the renewal of the communities around the agricultural industry. I mean, you look at Mareeba as a vibrant community that's surrounded by the agriculture. They're doing it's a fantastic diverse community based on agriculture. And when things like COVID hit, as far as I've understood, when talking to friends that live up there, the isolation for the fact that the dependency comes off that agriculture has meant that, well, everybody else needs food, and if they're in lockdown, that doesn't change, but everything for us has stayed the same. And we have the ability to be the powerhouse for the whole of the nation, even when other scenarios might hit, regardless of COVID, where everybody comes to a standstill. It's a stable, logical future for North Queensland that involves all industries, including mining, including aquatic farming, but agriculture is a need and a want, and it's fantastic there's people like Shaun, like yourself, Shaun, that are even thinking locally to act globally for things like children not having enough of an antioxidant that eyesight might be hindering. It's a fantastic thought of the potential we could do and solve some of the world's problems, or help to solve them. If only we had the political leadership to do that. So, I guess we'd like to really thank you for coming on the show, Shaun, because we know you're a busy man like yourself. You from sun up to sundown, no doubt, tending to everything in the farm. So, thanks again, and we really appreciate you coming on tonight.
That's all right. Good. I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you. If I can be any assistance, or we can jump in and help, let me know.
Oh, mate, that's fantastic to hear. And listen, it's good to know that there's good things happening in the greater areas of North Queensland and Central Queensland, like yourself. Because, mate, I must admit, I got excited. I got excited hearing somebody like yourself talking about what they're trying to achieve, the misgivings of what they're experiencing, and the hardships, minor or not, about what is in the way to try and achieve those things. And look, thanks for sharing everything. It really has been fantastic. And again, thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.
Right, enjoyed it.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, we might as well bring it to a close. It's a good night. It's been an evening. Sorry, Bill. Add your thought.
I just want to plug next week's show. Basically, we've managed to get in contact with Shane Condon, the founder of East-West Link Pro Limited, which is the overseeing company for Project Iron Boomerang. And he'll be our guest next week to give us a rundown on that project and its benefits, if they can get it across the line, to have a railway going from northwest Australia into Bowen, and steel plants on either side of the continent.
Did you hear any of that?
So we won't be shipping all that muck to Asia, and the world will be sending iron plate.
Yeah, look, I know this is your...
Look, it should be exciting next week, and we can't wait for Mr. Condon on the show, eh?
And again, thanks you, Shaun.
I think Shaun just left. He either got disconnected or left. So we do thank Shaun, and hopefully some other time in the future we might be able to get him onto the show. It's been fantastic. Look, if anyone would like to learn more about the New State campaign, they can visit bootbrisbane.com, where they can learn lots of interesting facts about how North and Central Queensland don't have the representation we deserve, and how, through a new state, we can solve that problem, both federally as well as on the state representative level. Or likewise, you can go to Facebook and visit, and like our page, bootbrisbane.com, and also the sponsor of this particular show, Yes to a North Queensland State. You can like their page as well and keep up to date with all things Queensland politics, which hopefully some point in the future will be all things just North Queensland politics. So good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Bill, and good evening, everyone.
Good night, David.
Good night.